While Matt Roloff stood by and watched his custom Kawasaki mule and the remnants of his farm legacy get optioned off to pay his massive debts, Caryn Chandler was caught on camera skipping town to Mexico. Today, we track the stolen money and reveal the $50 million real estate tycoon Caryn left Matt for. You might think you know the story of Roloff Farms, but what happened this week wasn't just a bankruptcy. It was a demolition of a legacy. While Matt was freezing in the Oregon rain, watching strangers bid pennies on the dollar for his life's work, Caryn was sipping premium tequila in a private villa, thousands of miles away from the wreckage she helped create. The tabloids are afraid to touch the real story, and the network is scrambling to bury the footage. But we have the insider reports that connect the dots between the farm's financial collapse and a mysterious offshore account that just went active in Cabo San Lucas. Before we expose the $50 million secret and the explosive theory regarding who Richard Sterling really is, I need you to go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We are the only ones brave enough to dig into the court filings and the deleted social media posts that tell the real story. If you want to see justice served and the truth exposed, turn on those notifications right now because this story is developing by the hour. To truly understand the gravity of what took place on Saturday morning, you have to look beyond the headlines. The mainstream outlets reported it as a standard liquidation auction, a sad but necessary step for a man looking to retire. But sources on the ground paint a picture that was less like a retirement party and more like a crime scene investigation. The air at Roloff Farms wasn't filled with nostalgia. It was heavy with the scent of diesel fumes and desperation. Witnesses describe Matt looking smaller than he ever has in 25 seasons of television. He wasn't the commanding patriarch barking orders from his mule. He was standing off to the side, wearing a jacket that looked too big for him, clutching a clipboard that he wasn't even reading. He was watching 20 years of projects, the very things that drove a wedge between him and Amy, the very obsessions that cost him his marriage, being sold off for scrap. We're talking about the physical dismantling of the Roloff empire. One insider who attended the auction claimed that the vibe was purely funereal. Local buyers weren't there to honor the show. They were there to pick the bones of a fallen kingdom. The custom mule, the vehicle that was practically an extension of Matt's body, the symbol of his mobility and his power over the land, was one of the first things to go. When the gavel slammed down, selling it for a fraction of its custom value to a local landscaping company, witnesses say Matt didn't even flinch. It was as if the light behind his eyes had already gone out. But the true heartbreak, the moment that signaled there was no coming back from this, was the destruction of the pirate ship. For years, that ship represented the magic of the farm. It was the centerpiece of the pumpkin season, the playground for the grandchildren, and a symbol of Matt's wildest dreams coming to life. But because of the liability insurance issues tied to the bankruptcy filings, documents that we have been analyzing for weeks, the ship couldn't be sold as a play structure. It was deemed a safety hazard. The crowd watched in stunned silence as a heavy-duty crane, brought in by the auction house, didn't lift the ship onto a truck, but instead dropped a crushing claw right through the center of the deck. The sound of the wood splintering echoed across the Helvetia Hills. It was a violent, visceral end to the childhood memories of Jackson and Ember. One neighbor who was present whispered that it felt like watching the final nail being driven into the coffin of the Roloff legacy. However, the destruction of the pirate ship was just a distraction from the real drama unfolding at the perimeter of the property. While the auctioneer was fast-talking through the sale of the castle facade, a different kind of vehicle pulled onto the gravel driveway. It wasn't a fan trying to get a selfie, and it wasn't a production crew from TLC. It was a pair of black SUVs with government plates. According to multiple attendees who were live streaming the event before their feeds were mysteriously cut, two men in windbreakers emblazoned with U.S. Marshals stepped out of the vehicles. They didn't approach Matt directly at first. Instead, they walked straight toward the luxury garage where Caryn's white SUV had been parked for weeks. The same vehicle she supposedly left behind when she flew out of Portland International Airport 3 days prior. The chatter in the crowd stopped instantly. You could hear a pin drop in the mud. The marshals were seen photographing the vehicle, checking the VIN number, and then, in a move that shocked everyone, they placed a bright orange seizure notice on the driver's side window. This wasn't a simple repossession for a missed car payment. U.S. Marshals get involved when there are federal implications, often tied to asset forfeiture in cases involving large-scale fraud or embezzlement investigations. The sight of federal agents seizing a vehicle on the property while Matt stood 50 yards away, completely paralyzed with shock, changes the entire narrative of this bankruptcy. It suggests that the bad investments Matt has been complaining about for the last 2 seasons weren't just poor market reads. It points to something far more sinister. The theory circulating among the most connected insiders is that the farm's liquidity didn't just evaporate, it was siphoned. The timing of the Marshals' arrival, coinciding perfectly with the liquidation of the physical assets, suggests that authorities were waiting for the moment Matt lost control of the property to make their move. And where was Caryn while her car was being tagged as federal evidence? She wasn't holding Matt's hand. She wasn't there to explain why a vehicle registered in her name was flagging in a federal database. She was gone. This brings us to the most painful realization for Matt. As he stood there in the cold, watching the agents photograph the contents of the seized SUV, the reality must have hit him harder than the crane hitting the pirate ship. He wasn't just broke, he was alone. The woman who had urged him to sell the big house, the woman who had whispered in his ear that the farm was too much work, the woman who had driven the final wedge between him and his twin boys, had vanished the moment the checks stopped clearing. Let's dig deeper into the specific items that were flagged during this raid. Reports from a source close to the production crew suggest that inside that seized SUV were documents that Matt thought were safe in his office. We are talking about deeds, transfer titles, and potentially the ledger for the pumpkin season cash revenues that were never fully accounted for in the tax returns. If Caryn was using that vehicle as a mobile office to move assets before she fled, and if she left it behind as a decoy, then Matt is currently holding the bag for a scheme he might not have even fully understood. The image of Matt Roloff, leaning on his crutches, watching the feds tape off a section of his own driveway while the auctioneer continued to sell his tools in the background, is a tragic Shakespearean tableau. It is the definition of hitting rock bottom. But what Matt didn't know at that moment, and what he likely is just finding out now along with the rest of the world, is that Caryn's flight to Cabo wasn't a panic move. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment vacation to clear her head. It was a calculated rendezvous. She wasn't running away from the trouble. She was running toward a new life that had been set up months in advance. A life funded, allegedly, by the very assets that were being stripped from Roloff Farms. While Matt was dealing with the humiliation of the auction, assuming Caryn was just taking space, she was actually touching down in Baja California. But she wasn't checking into a hotel. Our investigation into flight manifests and private transfers reveals that she was met on the tarmac, not by a taxi, but by a private driver. And that driver took her directly to the gated community of Pedregal, one of the most exclusive enclaves in Mexico. This is where the story shifts from a sad bankruptcy to a potential criminal conspiracy. Caryn didn't go to Cabo to hide. She went there to meet someone. And that someone is the key to unlocking where the Roloff fortune really went. We need to talk about Richard Sterling. If you haven't heard the name yet, memorize it now, because he is the ghost in the machine of the Roloff bankruptcy. While Matt was crying over his auction block, Caryn was photographed on the balcony of a sprawling seaside estate in Pedregal, standing next to a man who is the polar opposite of Matt Roloff in every conceivable way. Richard Sterling is 65 years old, stands 6'2", and possesses a net worth north of $50 million. He is a titan in commercial real estate development, primarily based out of Scottsdale, Arizona. And if that location rings a bell, it should. For the last 5 years, we have watched Caryn split her time between the farm in Oregon and her place in Arizona. We were told she bought a modest home there to be closer to her parents and to escape the rainy Pacific Northwest winters. But the timeline of her relationship with Sterling suggests that the Arizona house was never just a retirement plan. It was the headquarters for the exit strategy. According to deep dive investigative reports and leaked property records from Maricopa County, Richard Sterling and Caryn Chandler have been moving in the same social circles for over a decade. But here is where the story turns from a romantic betrayal into a financial forensic nightmare. The theory that is currently setting the internet on fire and reportedly being looked at by forensic accountants hired by the bankruptcy trustee is that Matt's infamous bad investments were not simply bad luck. They were manufactured losses designed to funnel liquid assets from Roloff Farms into shell corporations controlled by Sterling. Think back to the last 3 seasons of the show. What was the constant conflict? Matt was always starting massive, expensive projects that never seemed to finish or turn a profit. The new barn that went 3 times over budget. The zoning permits for the wedding venue cost hundreds of thousands of dollars but never got approved. The sudden need to restructure the farm's debt. We all watched Matt blame the county, blame the inspectors, and blame the economy. But what if the money wasn't being wasted? What if it was being stolen? We have uncovered the existence of a limited liability company registered in Nevada, a state known for its privacy laws regarding business ownership, called Sterling Chandler Holdings. This entity was formed 3 years ago, right around the time Matt began discussing the sale of the North 40 acres. The working theory is terrifying in its simplicity. It is alleged that Caryn, acting as Matt's farm manager and trusted confidant, steered Matt toward contractors and consultants who were actually subsidiaries of this Nevada holding company. Every time Matt signed a check for a feasibility study or a land survey or consulting fees for the new house build, he wasn't paying independent experts. He was effectively writing checks directly to the man who is now hosting his girlfriend in a Mexican villa. This explains the sheer speed of the farm's collapse. A farm that was generating millions in revenue from pumpkin seasons and television contracts doesn't just go bankrupt overnight because of a few pumpkins rotting in the field. It takes a hemorrhage of cash to sink a ship that big. And the U.S. Marshals seizing Caryn's car suggests they found the leak. Inside that SUV, alongside the personal effects, investigators likely found the paper trail linking the farm's operating accounts to these offshore entities. We're talking about invoices for materials that were never delivered and services that were never rendered. It is the classic bust-out scheme, popularized in mob movies, but executed with the smiles and hugs of a reality TV grandmother. The betrayal runs deeper than just the money. It rewrites the entire history of Matt and Caryn's relationship. Viewers have long speculated that Caryn was a gold digger, but Matt always defended her, claiming she had her own money and wasn't interested in his. He was half right. She wasn't interested in his money staying his. She was interested in converting his tangible assets, the land, the equipment, the legacy, into liquid cash that could be moved across borders. The reason she pushed so hard for him to sell the big house to the family wasn't to help the kids. It was to liquidate the asset. When the kids couldn't afford the inflated price she likely whispered into Matt's ear, she pushed for the open market sale. When that failed, the backup plan was initiated. Leverage the property to the hilt and strip the equity. Richard Sterling is the key because he provided the infrastructure for this transfer. As a sophisticated real estate developer, he knows how to bury transactions inside complex corporate structures. He knows how to make a kickback look like a legitimate consulting fee. And while Matt was busy playing the role of the visionary architect, drawing sketches on napkins and dreaming of his legacy, he was being outmaneuvered by a duo that viewed him not as a partner, but as a mark. The bad investments Matt has been crying about to the cameras were likely phantom projects pitched to him by Caryn. "Oh, Matt, you should really look into this investment in Arizona real estate." Or, "Matt, I know a guy who can handle the zoning for the new subdivision." He trusted her implicitly. He alienated his ex-wife, Amy. He pushed away his twin boys, Zach and Jeremy, all to protect the woman who was systematically dismantling his empire from the inside out. The psychology of this con is devastating. Matt Roloff has always prided himself on being the smartest guy in the room. He loves the art of the deal. He loves negotiating. For a man with his ego, to find out that he wasn't the master negotiator, but rather the victim of a 5-year-long hustle, is a fate worse than bankruptcy. It destroys his identity. While he was agonizing over whether the farm should go to Zach or Jeremy, Caryn was likely laughing behind closed doors, knowing that eventually the farm would belong to the bank, and the equity would belong to her and Sterling. Let's look at the timeline of the last week again with this new lens. The auction wasn't a surprise to Caryn. It was the finish line. The reason she wasn't there to support Matt wasn't because she couldn't bear to watch. It was because her job was done. The asset had been drained. The husk was being discarded. Staying around for the auction would only risk exposure. The moment the gavel fell, the final diversion was created, allowing her to slip away to the airport. Her flight to Cabo wasn't an escape. It was a victory lap. And what about the $50 million tycoon, Richard Sterling? Why would a man with that much money get involved in grifting a reality TV star? It's not just about the money. It's about the game. Sources in the Arizona real estate community describe Sterling as ruthless, a man who enjoys the kill as much as the meal. Taking down a D-list celebrity and snatching his girlfriend and his fortune right from under his nose is exactly the kind of power play that men like Sterling live for. It's a trophy hunt. Matt Roloff was the prey. The contrast between Matt's current reality and Caryn's new life is nauseating. At this very moment, while Matt is sitting in a motel room trying to figure out how to pay his legal defense fees against the looming federal inquiry, Caryn and Sterling are likely discussing their next investment, perhaps a vineyard in Napa or a condo in the Cayman Islands, using funds that originated from the sweat and tears of the Roloff family. The footage of the crane crushing the pirate ship is the perfect metaphor. That ship was fake. It was a prop. Just like the love Caryn professed for Matt, it was all a structure built to entertain the audience while the real business happened backstage. But the twist goes even further. There are rumors surfacing from the production staff that TLC has footage that never made the air, of Caryn taking phone calls in the middle of filming, stepping away from the mic pack, and speaking in hushed tones to a Richard. At the time, producers assumed it was a family member or a doctor. Now, looking back, those tapes are potential evidence in a grand larceny investigation. If the network is subpoenaed and those raw audio files are released, we might hear the planning of the heist in real time. We might hear Caryn giving updates on Matt's liquidity, updates on the sale of the mule, updates on when the wire transfers were cleared. This recontextualizes every fight Matt had with Amy in the last few years. Amy often warned Matt that Caryn was controlling him, that she had too much influence. The audience thought Amy was just bitter and jealous. But what if Amy smelled the rat long before anyone else? What if her refusal to sell her half of the farm to Matt for so long wasn't obstinance, but an instinctive protective measure to keep the assets out of Caryn's reach? In the end, Amy got out with her money. She sold her share and secured her future. Matt, the self-proclaimed business genius, is the one left holding the empty bag. As we move toward the climax of this tragedy, we have to prepare ourselves for the fallout. The legal walls are closing in, but the emotional devastation is already total. Matt isn't just broke, he has been played in the most public, humiliating way possible. And the eviction notice we are about to discuss? That is the final twist of the knife. It wasn't just the bank kicking him out. The entity that served the eviction notice to Matt Roloff at the big house wasn't a local Oregon bank. The paperwork, leaked by a process server who is a fan of the show, bears the letterhead of a holding company that traces back to the very same web of LLCs connected to Sterling. Is it possible that through a complex debt-buying scheme, Richard Sterling and Caryn Chandler now technically own the debt on the farm? Is it possible that Caryn is evicting Matt from the house he built? If the betrayal by Caryn Chandler and Richard Sterling was the knife in the back, the eviction notice was the twist that severed the spine of the Roloff legacy. We have obtained a copy of the document served to Matt Roloff just hours after the auctioneer's gavel fell silent. It wasn't a polite letter from a bank manager asking for a meeting. It was a standard, cold, 72-hour notice to vacate the premises, taped to the front door of the big house by a process server. But here is the detail that turns this tragedy into a horror story. The entity evicting Matt wasn't the local county bank. The eviction was filed by a shell company, North Star Acquisitions, which forensic document examiners believe is the debt-holding arm of the very same Sterling Chandler network we exposed earlier. This means that in a twist of cruel irony, Matt Roloff is being kicked out of his own home by his own girlfriend. The woman he built a life with, the woman he defended against his own children, essentially bought his debt for pennies on the dollar and is now using it to throw him onto the street. The king of Roloff Farms has been exiled from his kingdom by his own queen. Witnesses described the scene on Tuesday morning as something out of a funeral procession. There were no moving trucks. There was no team of helpers. The bridges Matt burned with Zach, Jeremy, and even Jacob meant that when the time came to leave, he was completely alone. Neighbors reported seeing Matt, leaning heavily on his crutches, struggling to carry a single battered leather briefcase out the front door. He didn't take the furniture. He didn't take the family photos that used to line the mantle. He didn't take the memorabilia from 25 seasons of reality TV stardom. He walked out with just the clothes on his back and the few personal papers he could salvage before the locks were changed. For a man who spent decades customizing that house to fit his specific physical needs, lowered countertops, accessible showers, custom ramps, leaving it wasn't just a loss of property, it was a loss of independence. He was leaving the only environment in the world designed for him to thrive and stepping out into a world that was not built for him. As he maneuvered his vehicle down the long, winding driveway past the stumps of the peach trees and the wreckage of the pirate ship, he didn't look back. The gate, the famous entrance to Roloff Farms that has been seen by millions of viewers around the world, swung shut behind him. And for the first time in 30 years, Matt Roloff was on the outside looking in. But where does a fallen king go when the castle gates are barred? He doesn't go to a palace, he goes into exile. We tracked Matt's vehicle to a roadside motel on the outskirts of Hillsborough, a place that rents rooms by the week and doesn't ask questions. This is the reality of the fallout. We are talking about a 200-square-foot room with peeling wallpaper, the smell of stale cigarettes, and the constant hum of the highway right outside the window. There are no custom ramps here. There are no lowered counters. Sources at the motel claim they saw Matt struggling just to get his key card to work in the rain. The contrast is shattering. While Matt sits in that cramped room, likely heating up a microwave meal and staring at the water stains on the ceiling, Caryn Chandler is reportedly shopping for yacht interiors in Cabo San Lucas. She is living the life Matt promised her, but she is doing it without the baggage of Matt himself. She took the golden goose, slaughtered it, and is now feasting on the carcass with a $50 million real estate tycoon who views the destruction of the Roloff family as just another Tuesday business transaction. However, in this darkness, there is one beam of light, or perhaps one stroke of ultimate karma, depending on how you look at it. While Matt hits rock bottom, Amy Roloff has risen from the ashes like a phoenix. The matriarch who was pushed out, marginalized, and gaslit for years has made the ultimate power move. Sources close to the family confirm that Amy has taken the proceeds from her share of the farm sale, money that she wisely kept separate from Matt's chaotic investments, and placed $2.1 million into an irrevocable trust. This isn't a trust for Matt. It isn't a trust to save the farm. It is a trust strictly designated for her grandchildren. Jackson, Ember, Lila, Bodie, and the rest of the cousins now have their financial futures secured, not by the visionary grandfather who promised them an empire, but by the grandmother who quietly saved the pennies while the grandfather was busy spending the pounds. Amy didn't buy a villa in Mexico. She didn't buy a sports car. She bought a legacy. By locking that money away in a trust that Matt cannot touch, she has ensured that the Roloff name survives the financial apocalypse Matt created. It is the ultimate victory. She proved that you don't need a 50-acre farm to be the head of a family. You just need integrity. So, we are left with the final burning question that demands an answer from every single person watching this video. As Matt Roloff sits alone in that motel room, listening to the rain fall, stripped of his land, his money, his woman, and his dignity, Is he the victim? Is he a tragic figure who was manipulated by a master con artist and a ruthless tycoon? Was he blinded by love and taken advantage of by a woman who played the long game better than he ever could? Or is this simply karma? Is this the universe balancing the scales for how he treated Amy? Is this the price he pays for prioritizing his ego over his children? Is this justice for the way he dangled the farm in front of his sons like a carrot, only to snatch it away when they wouldn't dance to his tune? He spent years building walls between himself and his family, and now he is trapped behind the walls of a cheap motel, while the family he pushed away moves on without him. The authorities are closing in. The U.S. Marshals are still processing the evidence from Caryn's SUV. The bankruptcy trustee is eyeing the Caryn Chandler connection. There is a very real possibility that this story ends not just in poverty, but in prison. If the fraud allegations hold water, if the money laundering theories are proven true, Matt might be trading his motel room for a cell. And you can bet that Caryn won't be visiting him on Sundays. We will be following the money trail as the feds unseal the indictments. We will be there if and when Richard Sterling is called to testify. This story is far from over, but the era of Roloff Farms is dead and buried. The pirate ship is wood chips, the mule is sold, and the king is in exile. What do you think? Did Caryn plan this from day one, or did she just jump ship when the water got too high? Does Matt deserve a second chance, or is he getting exactly what he ordered? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. I read every single one. And do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because the moment the FBI releases their findings on the Cabo money trail, we will be the first to break the news. Until then, keep your eyes open, because in the world of reality TV, nothing is real except the betrayal.